Morning. Welcome. We at Policy Exchange like to live dangerously, and so we like to do things at dramatically short notice. But for no event is this more significant than this policy area today. We're delighted to be launching the Augar Report. It's been a subject of great interest to Policy Exchange through the years. We've produced a lot of work on the themes around HE and FE and the balance between them, and this is really the culmination of the latest set of efforts to ensure that the issues which it identifies, the balance between HE and FE, remain on the national public policy agenda for years to come. It's in every sense a heavyweight report, not least because copies of this large document have had to come up in the goods lift, and so we're delighted that so many of the key players in this space are here today. I particularly want to extend warm welcome to the Prime Minister, who's been so consistently interested in the subject and been such a good friend to this organisation through the years, from a period in opposition through the Home Office and obviously most recently as Prime Minister. Also to Damian Hinds as Secretary of State for Education, who I've known longer than I care to say, and of course to Philip and the outstanding group of commissioners that have laboured so hard on this piece of work. We will be taking this the themes in here forward, be led by David Goodhart, who heads our people and demography work, and we'll be looking forward to having roundtables in the coming days with the key stakeholders in this space, chaired by Baroness Wolf, whom we're also delighted to be able to welcome here today, one of the commissioners. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you all. We'll have first Secretary of State, then Philip Augar, then Prime Minister concluding. Damian, look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for coming.
Well, Dean, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for being here. There is a huge amount of thought and a huge amount of work has gone into this, what Dean rightly described as a very heavyweight report since the launch back at Derby College. And at the Department for Education, we have a straightforward ambition, which is that everyone, whatever their background and whatever their route, should have the opportunity to develop their skills, develop their knowledge in a way to truly fulfil their potential. And this report is an important part of that. We'll be studying the panel's recommendations in detail and also looking forward to an opportunity to discuss those with many of you here today as well. For now, I want to just thank the members of the panel, Professor the Baroness Alison Wolfe, Professor Edward Peck, both of whom are here today, and also Beverly Robinson, Professor Sir Ivor Crewe, Jacqueline de Rojas, and of course the Chair, Philip Augar, who it's my great pleasure to introduce to you now. Philip.
Good morning, everyone. I too would like to begin with some thanks. Thank you all for coming, actually. It's half-term week, and launching a report in half-term week is not ideal for everyone. I hope that hasn't caused you undue difficulties. I'd also like to thank the panel on whose behalf I'm presenting this work. Alison and Edward are here, but it's been a tireless effort, a piece of objective analysis, and it's genuinely a team effort. I'd also like to thank the Secretariat from the DFE, who've worked really hard to support us in this process. So thank you all so much. But the main thanks are actually due to the Prime Minister, to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the Secretary of State for giving us the opportunity to do this piece of work, but above all, for asking the right question at the beginning. I say that because this is the first review since the seminal Robbins Report of 1963 to have looked at both parts of the tertiary education sector together, at both further and higher education. That question, never before asked in this way in a government review, is an opportunity to consider the roles both parts should play in meeting the country's social and economic needs, and how they are performing against those objectives. That's really where the panel started. What should these sectors be doing, and how are they performing? The answers frankly surprised us. Some of these answers came from students themselves. At focus groups across the country, the panel heard similar themes. 18-year-old students pushed to go to university, regardless of whether they wanted to go or really felt that it was for them. Like the young man in Manchester who said to us, "You're told it's university or your life is over." We heard from undergraduates, parents and grandparents worried about student debt and fear of not being able to repay. Like the grandmother in Norfolk who asked if she should sell her house to pay for her grandchildren's degrees. We heard from adults struggling to combine work and study, like the mature student in Newcastle who told us the system doesn't work for older people. They are making it impossible. We were surprised too, when we looked at the numbers, by the decline in the total number of 18-year-olds in education. The welcome growth in higher education over the past 20 years has not been enough to match the drop in part-time, technical and vocational education. This, we discovered as our work progressed, is not the story of relentless and universal progress that the growth in higher education would suggest. It led us to ask, what of the 50% of young people who do not go to university, and the large majority of older people in the population who do not have a publicly funded degree, some of whom might want to return to education? We discovered that, in effect, England is a nation of two halves when it comes to post-18 education. Last year, over £8 billion supported 1.2 million UK undergraduates in English universities. Just £2 billion supported 2.2 million adults and further education students. Tertiary education, it transpires, is a story of care and neglect, depending on which sector you happen to be in and whether or not you already have a degree. The panel believes that this disparity simply has to be addressed as a matter of fairness and social justice. Addressing it would bring considerable economic benefits to individuals, employers, and society at large. It is actually our core message. So how can we address this? What is to be done? We propose action to strengthen technical education through improved funding, a better maintenance offer, and a more coherent suite of employer-focused higher technical qualifications. And for those who have missed out at school or college, we propose free second chance access to intermediate level education for adults of all ages. Almost 40% of 25-year-olds do not progress beyond GCSEs as their highest qualification. This second chance offer is a key to improving social mobility. A refunded, reformed further education sector based on a stronger network of colleges is essential in delivering this offer. FE colleges play a core role in many towns, cities and rural communities, but they are a neglected national asset. We recommend an injection of capital funding spread over a number of years, an increase in funding rates, and a reorganisation of the FE network to put high-quality education and training within reach of all. It's now 30 years since the then Secretary of State for Education, Kenneth Baker, described further education as the Cinderella sector. But successive governments of all persuasions have not taken Cinderella to the ball. The government's review is an opportunity to finally deliver the glass slipper. In higher education, the story is different. We have no doubt that England's universities are one of the country's world-class industries, and their expansion has brought significant benefits to increasing numbers of young people, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. We acknowledge and celebrate this. But we were asked in our terms of reference to assess whether the sector is supported by a funding system that provides value for money for students and taxpayers and delivers the skills our country needs. Our conclusions are, yes, it does, but it is a qualified yes. A decade of generous funding in higher education, at a time of austerity elsewhere in public finances, has led both to an oversupply of some courses and an undersupply of graduates in strategically important sectors. This is a problem for students, employers, and the taxpayer. The current fee, which is high by international standards, can act as a deterrent to disadvantaged groups. A small but significant minority of students are getting poor value from their university experience. At age 29, graduates in some subjects from some institutions earn less than their peers who did not study for a degree. And recent analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests that the significant taxpayer subsidy directed at higher education is not well aligned with the economy's needs. The panel's report sets out our proposals to address these issues. We believe government should have greater control over taxpayer support to HE, and that universities should charge students no more than the reasonable cost of providing courses. We therefore propose that maximum fees for students should be reduced to £7,500, that's from £9,250, and more of the taxpayer funding should come through grants directed to disadvantaged students and to high-value and low-cost subjects. We believe that the sector can and should absorb an efficiency saving through a further 3-year freeze in per-student resources. Disadvantaged 18-year-olds are more likely to take a full-time degree than ever. This is an important advance in social mobility. But there are still significant gaps in access, participation, and success at university for students from these groups. So, we are recommending greater support for disadvantaged students through reintroducing the maintenance grants for students from low-income households and increased and better targeted funding for them. Most graduates benefit significantly from participating in higher education, as does the economy as a whole. We therefore endorse the principle that students and the state should share the cost of tertiary education. We support the income contingent repayment approach as a means of delivering this fairly, but it needs to be explained better to students, parents and, yes, grandparents. We welcome the recent work by the Russell Group and the consumer champion Martin Lewis to pilot a new communications system around student loans, and we propose that the whole scheme be renamed the Student Contribution System. But we do believe that the balance of contributions should shift, with more graduates repaying their loans, which would be much lower under our recommendations, in full over the period from which they benefit. This means effectively freezing the repayment threshold and extending the period during which graduates are repaying their loans from 30 to 40 years. Some aspects of the present system appear to be unfairly punitive, and we recommend reducing students' in-study interest charges and capping graduates' lifetime repayments. Overall, our recommendations seek to redress the imbalance in funding and outcomes between the 50% of young people who attend university and those who do not. But in today's rapidly changing economy, we also believe a new and more flexible approach is needed to learning, to enable everyone to upskill and reskill during their working lives. We propose a new lifelong learning loan allowance to be used at any stage of an adult's career, at higher technical levels and above, for full and part-time students. Individuals will be able to work, move on or move up, and still have the opportunity to return to study later, in the subjects, at the pace, at the levels that suited their careers. Some of our proposals come at additional taxpayer cost, while others deliver significant savings. As a package, they are not cost-free. But taken together, they better target the substantial HE subsidy already in the system and provide the long-needed investment in our network of FE colleges to deliver the technical skills the economy needs with potentially significant benefits to the country's productivity. When she launched the review in Derby in February 2018, the Prime Minister spoke of her ambition to build a country where, she said, a boy from a working class home can become a High Court judge thanks to a great state education, and where a girl from a private school can start a software business thanks to a first-class technical education. This report, the first since the Robbins Report of 1963 to consider both parts of tertiary education together, offers a prospectus for a post-18 system which can deliver this ambition. Once again, on behalf of the panel, I should like to thank the Prime Minister for giving us this opportunity, but above all, for asking the right question. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you, Dean, for hosting us here at Policy Exchange. And can I thank you, Philip, and your panel for all the work that you've undertaken over the past year, and thank you for sharing some of your findings with us this morning. Your report is a groundbreaking piece of work, because it is one that sets out in compelling detail the challenges confronting all of us who care about post-18 education in all its forms. It's a sector that since 2010 the government has consistently supported. We've increased the funding flowing to universities, delivered more high-quality apprenticeships, developed brand new technical qualifications on a par with A-levels. Yet, as we've just heard, there remains much to be done. The UK boasts some of the finest universities in the world, universities that we can be proud of and that all government should pledge to support and protect. But in technical education, we have fallen behind other leading nations. Our further education colleges have the potential to transform lives and grow our economy, but the FE landscape can be confusing to navigate. Too many students, parents and employers see further education as a second best option, and successive governments have failed to give it the support it needs. For nearly 20 years, there's been a relentless focus on getting 50% of young people into higher education. Yet most have lost sight of the fact that the original target referred not just to university degrees. It quite rightly covered the whole higher education spectrum, including vocational and technical qualifications. And that's why in February last year, as you've just heard, I set Philip a clear yet ambitious challenge to break down the false boundaries between further and higher education, to look at all the options open to young people and to say how they could be improved and how the state should support students so that every school leaver and indeed every adult learner can follow the path that is right for them. With today's report, Philip and his expert panel have provided a blueprint for how those improvements and changes could be carried out. As we've heard, it makes many recommendations across further and higher education. The proposals on adult and lifelong learning are also important. Decisions about whether and how to implement these recommendations will not fall to me, but to the next government. But regardless of the debate to come, there can be no doubt that this report represents a major landmark, and that the data, analysis and insights it contains will help us to deliver a post-18 education system that truly works for everyone. That needs to begin with further education. Our FE and technical colleges are not just places of learning. They're vital engines of both social mobility and of economic prosperity, training the next generation and helping deliver our modern industrial strategy. But for too long, further education has been allowed to stagnate with student numbers falling. With MPs, civil servants and, yes, even journalists overwhelmingly coming from university backgrounds, it's no surprise, perhaps, that attention has drifted away from other post-18 options. I found it rather telling that despite the wide-ranging remit of the panel, in the year since the review was launched, the debate around it has concentrated almost exclusively on what it will mean for universities. As the panel argues, this focus on academic routes at the expense of all others has left further education overlooked, undervalued and underfunded. Routes into and through our colleges are confusing and opaque. There's no equivalent of the clear, straightforward and comprehensive UCAS system. And this system isn't just bad for students, it's bad for our economy. By failing to equip more of our young people with the technical skills they will need to compete in the jobs of the future, we've hampered our ability to compete on the world stage. Businesses here in the UK regularly tell me that they struggle to find workers with the technical qualifications they need, but that their rivals overseas have no such problems. As the report says, in Germany, 20% of the workforce holds a higher technical qualification. Here in the UK, just 4% of 25-year-olds can say the same. Behind that statistic lies an immeasurable number of opportunities missed and potential wasted both for individuals and employers. So reinvigorating FE is vital if we're to help all our young people develop the skills they need to get on, and if we're truly to make a success of our modern industrial strategy. Now, as Prime Minister, it is something I've worked hard to do. The government has made sure there's an educational training place for every 16 to 19-year-old who wants one. We're rolling out T-levels, new high-quality technical qualifications on a par with A-levels to give students a clear choice at 16. We've committed to launching institutes of technology in every major English city, and this year announced the first 12. And we're creating more high-quality apprenticeships that deliver for students and employers alike. But while these reforms have made a real difference, the report is clear that if the half of young people who do not go to university are to have the skills they need for the future, then we must go further. It's not enough to simply say that FE and HE should be seen as equals. As the report argues compellingly, to make that happen, we will have to invest much more in further education, in the buildings, the equipment, and of course in teachers who are expert in their field. And making a success of FE is not just about increased funding, it's about giving these young people a genuine choice about their education. So more also needs to be done to ensure that further and technical options are every bit as attractive a path for students as more academic options, including by reforming the sector so that colleges can thrive. That will mean more specialisation and collaboration, while also continuing to make sure all young people have access to a college in their local area, and reforms to ensure the courses offered by colleges deliver the skills that are needed by local businesses. And of course, we also need to make sure that only high-quality qualifications are on offer, that FE students are appropriately supported by government, and that the route to further education is as streamlined and clear as possible, just as it is for universities. Now, of course, for many young people, following the path to university is absolutely the right option. And prospective students in this country are blessed with many of the best universities in the world, 4 of the top 10 and almost a fifth of the top 100, according to the latest rankings. Our reforms since 2010 have been designed to ensure that success continues. We've given universities the long-term funding they need, removed the cap on student numbers, and made the system fairer, with the students who will benefit from a university education contributing more and the taxpayer contributing a little less. And as this report shows, those reforms have been broadly successful. But I agree with Philip and his panel that while the core structure of the system is sound, there is room for improvement in the way it functions. For example, we need to look again at the level of tuition fees. We've already frozen the maximum level of tuition fees and raised the threshold at which graduates have to start paying back their loans. But when in 2012 the tuition fee cap was raised to £9,000, most predictions were that the full amount would only be charged by the top universities for the highest quality and most prestigious and potentially lucrative degrees. That is not what has happened. The vast majority of degrees are now set at the maximum fee, and the panel's report rightly questions whether that is acceptable. After all, plenty of courses do not cost the full current rate of £9,250 per student per year to teach. And while the majority provide good outcomes for students, we know that's no longer true across the board. Indeed, the report rightly calls for further action to drive out the minority of degrees that are of poor quality, and I hope to see the Office for Students using the powers we have given it to do just that. So there's much to be said for the panel's proposal to cut fees and top up the money from government, protecting the sector's income overall, but focusing more of that investment on high quality and high value courses. The top-up funding would come from an increased teaching grant, with funding distributed in a way that reflects each subject's reasonable cost and value. I know there are some, including the Labour opposition, who will reject this finding because they want to abolish fees altogether. Such a move would be regressive and destructive, hurting our institutions and limiting the opportunities for our young people. First and foremost, it will be completely unaffordable and is therefore completely incredible. The only reason we're in a position to invest in higher and further education to the extent that we are, the only reason we can consider strengthening that investment in the years ahead, is because of the strength of the economy that successive Conservative-led governments have helped build. That strength comes from taking a balanced approach to our public finances, investing in public services while keeping our debt falling, something the Labour Party's plans for £1,000 billion of unfunded spending would certainly never deliver. Scrapping fees would also lead to worse outcomes. It would, as we've seen in Scotland, force government to reintroduce a cap on student numbers, an arbitrary annual limit that, far from opening the door to opportunity, slams it in the face of thousands of young people. And worst of all, it would be socially regressive, disproportionately benefiting students who go on to earn the most. It simply cannot be fair to expect people working hard in low-paid jobs to fully fund the education of students from well-off families who will go on to earn much more as a result. All the evidence shows that scrapping fees would simply be the wrong approach, unaffordable, unsustainable and unfair. But reducing the cost of higher education would make a real difference to many students. And we should also be more upfront about what that cost will actually be. When the Office for National Statistics announced that it would be reclassifying student loans as part government spending, most people focused on the £12 billion it will add to the deficit up front. But this piece of technical accounting also made clear to the world what the architects of the system already knew, that many students never pay off their loan in full, with taxpayers covering 45% of the cost. I believe we should be much more transparent about this. Prospective students who are put off university by the idea of borrowing large sums for their tuition bills should know that in reality they're unlikely to have to pay back the full amount. But tuition fees are not the only bills students have to deal with. The cost of living can also be prohibitively high for students from less well-off families who are living away from home. Now, going to university was one of the biggest privileges of my life, opening the door to so many opportunities that followed. I want this to be a country where every young person, regardless of which school they go to or what their parents do for a living, is able to follow a similar path if they so choose and it's right for them. Nobody should feel they have to go to university, and that applies to children from middle-class backgrounds just as much as anyone. But nor should anybody feel that because of who they are or where they're from, the world of HE is one that is not open to them because it will cost too much. Now, thanks to this government, universities are legally required to improve access. And if you're an 18-year-old from a disadvantaged background, you're now more likely to go to university than ever before. But improvements are slow, and the challenge remains large. The number of young people from working-class families who apply to and take up places at universities is still a long way from reflecting the country in which we live. That's why I made access one of the key areas of focus for the Augar Review, asking Philip and his panel to look at the lingering barriers that prevent some young people from applying for university, taking up a place or completing their course. And that included the issue of maintenance grants. In 2015, the decision was taken to replace maintenance grants with loans, allowing us to raise the maximum level of maintenance support for students in England to among the highest in the world. These loans are not like ordinary debt and are only paid off when you're earning a good salary. But talking to young people from less well-off backgrounds, I've heard too often how this financial outlay can deter them from applying for university at all. I've spoken to parents and grandparents forced to scrimp and save to fund their children and grandchildren through university. And I've seen how young graduates starting out in their adult lives feel weighed down by the burden of student debt. So I was not surprised to see the panel argue for the reintroduction of means-tested maintenance grants, both for university students and those studying for higher technical qualifications. Such a move would ensure students are supported whichever route they choose and save those from the poorest backgrounds over £9,000. It will be up to the government to decide at the upcoming spending review whether to follow their recommendation. But my view is very clear. Removing maintenance grants from the least well-off students has not worked, and I believe it is time to bring them back. Securing the right education for every child and every young person is an aspiration that drove me in my earliest days in politics, when I was chair of the local education authority in the London Borough of Merton. It drove me from my first day as an MP. Indeed, it was the subject of my maiden speech in the House of Commons more than 2 decades ago. And it's driven me throughout my time in Downing Street. I've always believed, and I still truly believe, that if this is to be a country that works for everyone, we have to make education work for everyone. Because the solutions to so many of the burning injustices that plague so many lives can be found in our schools, our colleges, and our universities. So as we look ahead to the spending review and beyond, I believe the government will need to take very seriously the report's proposals to boost further education spending and put right the errors of the past. To restore higher education maintenance grants, so students from the poorest backgrounds no longer leave university with a higher level of headline debt than the richest. And to cut tuition fees, so students pay a fairer price for their education. Now, of course, it's always necessary to prioritise when it comes to choices on public spending. These decisions will need to be taken in the round as part of the balanced approach to the economy and public finances that has allowed us to make long-term investments in public services like the NHS. But only by taking action now will we be able to deliver the lasting change and improvements we need in further and higher education. Give every child and young person in this country the education they need to reach their true potential, and ensure that everyone, whatever their background, can go as far as their talent and hard work will take them. Thank you. Now I'll take a few media questions. I think Sean's here from the BBC.
I am indeed, yes. Hello. Thank you very much. You spoke about wanting to bring back maintenance grants and wanting to lower the headline rate of fees. And you talked about burning injustices, a phrase you've once used before. Do you regret, when we look at your legacy and look back at what your time in office will have achieved, you haven't focused more on such issues rather than being embroiled in Brexit? As a secondary, how do you feel about so many people fighting for your old job?
Well, can I first of all congratulate you, because I did think that as we were talking about further and higher education, nobody would get the word Brexit into any of their questions. So well done for doing that. Look, I think the very fact that I launched this review, that I asked over a year ago now, Philip Augar and the panel to look at this issue, shows how important I felt it was. And as I said at the end of my speech, I have always felt that this education is absolutely the key. It's the key that unlocks the door to people's futures. And we need to ensure that for every young person, they get the education that's right for them. And for too long in this country, we have great universities, and it's wonderful for those who want to go to university and for whom it's right. But we need to ensure that for all young people, their talents are being fully developed. They're getting the skills, as we heard from Damian and Philip earlier, the skills that they need, the knowledge that they need for the future. And this is important for our economy as a whole. So I think this is a really important report. I think it's about education, it's about social mobility, it's about people's lives, but it's also about the future of our economy. And you asked about the number of candidates and potential candidates standing. This is a country of opportunity. Is Richard here from the Eye? Yes.
Richard Vaughan from the Eye newspaper. Prime Minister, how much of what you've announced today is an attempt to bind the hands of your successor? And just on your premiership, you have suffered possibly more slings and arrows than any other Prime Minister during your 3 years. How difficult has that been personally for you?
Well, first of all, this is a report that will obviously have to be studied in detail by the government. They will be looking at the costings, they'll be looking at the implications of the various recommendations. There are a lot of recommendations in this report. What I'm saying is, first of all, this is hugely important for the future of our country. Actually getting that education across the whole spectrum right for young people is about the lives of those young people, but it's also about us as a country and how we can go forward and improve our economy and improve those opportunities for people. And so I think the government will obviously look at this very carefully. I've set out where I think there are important recommendations, but there are many other recommendations here that will have to be looked at very clearly. Is Charles from the Telegraph? Yes. Sorry, I can't see everybody in
Yes.
lighting
Charles
here.
Hymas from the Daily Telegraph. You talk very passionately about the return of maintenance grant, but figures have been put on that of about £6 billion. Do you believe that the Treasury should fully fund that maintenance grant provision that you would like to see?
Well, first of all, I've set out why I think we need to look again at that decision that was taken in relation to maintenance grants. You've quoted a figure that I see has been quoted in the press. Actually, the Augar Report itself has put figures in of significantly lower figure for the cost of what they're proposing. Now, when government looks at this, it will obviously look at costing everything. It'll have to look at it in the round in terms of the other priorities, as I say. But go back and look at the Augar Report, and you'll see some different figures in there. I'll take one last. Did I see Eleanor? Yes.
Eleanor Harding from the Mail. The review recommends having the repayment time extended to 40 years. Is this something you would support, and if so, why?
No, this is, look, in relation to the tuition fees, there are a number of recommendations that are made that will need to be looked at very carefully. I think in order to ensure that we have that system that is enabling young people to go to university when it's right for them, that they're not put off by the question of the cost and of the debt that they're going to have in the future. But can I just make an observation? I think most of the questions so far have been about higher education and universities. Actually, at least half of this report, if not more, covers recommendations for further education for the rest of tertiary education, for adult learning as well. This is...
FE question here from FE Week.
You've got an FE question from FE Week. Well, you may force me to take. I'm happy to take it if you just wait until I make this point. But I think this is why this report is so important, because yes, it's, people will look at this, and a lot of the debate around this issue has been around tuition fees. But actually, look across the breadth of this report. It's about getting education right across the whole spectrum for young people. So there you are. Well said for FE Week.
That's correct. Thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, about 10 years we've been reporting for the further education sector on issues such as policy. Delighted with this report and its strength around, as you described, moving money, I think, in some ways away from HE, perhaps, if it's not going to cost a lot more to FE. This time last week, I was at the High Court listening to a QC petition the judge on behalf of the Secretary of State to put the very first further education college into administration. And we now have 3 administrators who work for BDO, so accountants running the college. This is the first time. So we've had reviews. We've had Alison Wolfe 2011. We've had Richard 2017. We've had now Augar. Why you talk like you are in opposition when you describe investment in FE? Why hasn't more happened before now, and why are we waiting for a spending review?
Look, first of all, I set out in my speech what action the government has taken in both HE and the FE sector. What this report says is that actually more needs to be done in the FE sector. But if I may just say, in terms of the challenge that you put, I think there's often an assumption in this country that every single institution continues regardless of whether it is able to provide what it is supposed to be providing for the students that are there. What the report does is shows how it is possible to help colleges across the sector to not just continue but to thrive. And those concepts of collaboration, of specialisation, I think are really important concepts that have come into this. So we are looking, much has been done for FE, but this says more needs to be done, and I think it's right that we absolutely make sure that the education for every young person is what is right for them. Thank you.